Hey, tennis fans, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a crucial and often controversial topic: how inequality in tennis continues to let women down. Despite the progress made over the years, there are still glaring disparities between men and women in the sport, from prize money to media coverage and beyond. Is the tennis world truly as equal as it claims to be? Let's explore the challenges female players face and what needs to change to level the playing field. But before we dive in, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an important discussion like this one. Let's go. On March at the Madrid Open, Coco Gauff was warming up on the least desirable practice courts when she saw some male players, without small numbers next to their names, on the much better courts. Gauff is familiar with the misogynist history of the tournament. She partnered with compatriot Jessica Pegula against Victoria Azarenka and Beatriz Haddad-Maia in the women's doubles final in 2023, after Azarenka and other players commented on unfair scheduling and the size disparity of birthday cakes for Carlos Alcaraz and Aryna Sabalenka. Officials refused to let the foursome speak after the match. Gauff said she had seen progress this year, but she couldn't help but notice the weirdness. She, a Grand Slam champion and the world number 3, was warming up at an event just one rung below the US Open on really bad courts. When you look out on the practice court and you see guys who are ranked 30 or 40 spots lower than you on the court, you're like, okay, what happened? She said a few days later. Maybe that doesn't sound like a big deal. She played her match on the top court, in a desirable time slot. There are plenty of benefits that Gauff and a handful of other women at the top of tennis enjoy, including prize money and endorsements that can reach into the tens of millions of dollars. Still, to exist as a female tennis player in 2024 is to endure what can feel like endless slights. The microaggressions baked in. The structural inequality foundational to a sport run mostly by men. Stark set-piece examples of inequality that can be hard to comprehend and harder to endure, for their magnitude, their reasoning, or more commonly both. I get a little bit frustrated here because I feel some tournaments in Europe can fancy men more than women. I see that especially on social media, more posts about the men, more this, more that, and for me it's really frustrating because we play really well. And it's such, an amazing sport for women. So I wish we could be more seen. Ons Jabeur, the two-time Wimbledon finalist from Tunisia, told The Athletic in Madrid, "I think we deserve better. It's not just Europe." Jabeur, 29, just finished playing the Italian Open, where the women competed for a prize pool of $5.5 million. The men's equivalent was $8.5 million. In August, the men and women arrive at the Western and Southern Open in Mason, Ohio. The men play for $7.9 million, the women for $6.8 million, even though the tournament owner, Ben Navarro, has a daughter, Emma, who plays on the WTA Tour. A tournament spokesperson did not respond to a request for comment. The knee-jerk reaction is that women don't bring in as much money as the men, and if they did, they wouldn't be second-class citizens. Yet consider a counter-narrative. During the 55-year history of the sport's modern era, if women had received the same exposure and investment as men, and didn't have to confront countless barriers and aggressions, maybe they would be bringing in the same amount of money. Consider that more generally, the WTA Tour's most lucrative route to additional funding centers on being in lockstep with the ATP Tour men, over letting Saudi Arabia, a country where women do not have equal rights, pump money into tennis. How else do elite women get the short end of the racket handle in the sport to which they dedicate their lives? It's been that way basically forever. There's an implicit message that everyone in tennis, from the little girl who just started taking lessons to the world number 1, receives. Tournament officials often say it has to be this way. The men play best of 5 sets in the Grand Slams. The women play best of 3. We'll get to that. We have thoughts. Whoever plays the final on Saturday has to have one day during the tournament where 2 players compete on consecutive days, between the second day of quarterfinals and the semifinals. Since the men play longer matches, it wouldn't be fair for their semifinalists to have to play on consecutive days, would it? Perhaps not. The French and Australian Opens now stretch their first round over 3 days, and the other Grand Slams could follow suit. Surely there is a permutation that allows the men and women who have reached the late stages of the peak of their sport equal rest? Of course, there are also television contracts that exist television contracts that get renegotiated all the time. If there is a will, perhaps there is a way. If there is a will, Darren Pearce, chief spokesperson for Tennis Australia, said they have looked at a swap and will continue to do so. They moved the women's final to Saturday night in 2009 to maximize domestic exposure, but they have to consider time zones and international exposure as well. Pearce cited Australian Ash Barty's win in 2022 as an example of the Saturday offering so much more coverage and exposure in Australia. The US Open has looked at swapping the two finals in an effort to optimize viewership and interest, said Brendan McIntyre, a USTA spokesperson. ESPN announced that its free-to-air broadcaster, ABC, will show the US Open men's final, though the women's final the day before will remain on the pay channel, ESPN, because ABC has contractual commitments to college football that Saturday. The U.S. women's final has outperformed the men's Final Four of the past 5 years in television viewership, and the men's final competes with the opening weekend of the NFL. In this case, the second-class spot may be a blessing. A Wimbledon spokesperson said the current setup offers the right balance. What about the big mixed events where both the women and the men play best-of-3 sets? Indian Wells has a final Sunday on which both the women and the men play. Guess who plays first? Cincinnati will hold the finals on the same day this year, and we'll see who goes first. Miami, Madrid and Rome have the women play Saturday, the men's Sunday. I don't really think that it's just a question of money, but also respect, Jabeur said. It's small details that make the difference. It happens in a macro way, too. The WTA Tour Finals take place the week before the ATP Tour Finals. The Billie Jean King Cup wraps up before the Davis Cup, although there will be overlap from this year. Next year, Great Britain's Lawn Tennis Association will host a women's WTA 500 at the Queen's Club in London. It will begin immediately after the French Open, the week before the men take the stage at Queen's. And in the build-up, the focus has been not on the benefits of a women's tournament at such a prestigious event, but whether or not the ATP is happy that the grass will be pristine enough for male feet after a week of tennis. There will not be equal prize money, games, sets, and matches. Jessica Pegula, the world number 5 and a member of the WTA Player Council, made it very clear at the French Open in 2022. "I don't want to play 3 out of 5, Pegula said. She's hardly the only one. It's a slog, with matches that can stretch beyond 5 hours, and then you have to do it all over again 2 days later. There is not a throng of women's players clamoring for best-of-5 tennis at the Grand Slams. It's still the third rail of equality in tennis. Best-of-5 sets only exists at the Grand Slams, where women and men compete for the same prize money. And a lot of folks complain that it's equal pay for less work every time it comes up. It's a prime example of another uneven dynamic, where women have to account for every possible bad faith accusation that could emerge before opening their mouths on the biggest issues in their sport. Duration isn't the only element of work. Best-of-3 requires immediate competitiveness, with little time for recovery. It's not Swiatek's fault that she is so good at plowing through the competition, and it's no player's fault that the best players in the men's game might drop 2 sets to lesser opponents and have to claw back 3. It's also not any WTA player's fault that tennis audiences sometimes dismiss the variety of styles in the women's game as boring, though they're probably talking without watching. Anyone who has watched a WTA match this year, especially between Swiatek, Sabalenka, Gauff, and Rybakina, would have to agree with the poll's comments after her Madrid final against Sabalenka. Who's gonna say now that women's tennis is boring? Stardom also fluctuates. When Wimbledon and the French, US, and Australian Open sell tickets, sponsorships, and media rights, they mostly don't sell separately for the men's tournament and the women's tournament. There were plenty of days and nights when Serena Williams was the featured match in New York and elsewhere, and a couple of guys were the undercard or the afterthought. In Rome this month, where men and women play best-of-3, the WTA semifinals featured the top 3 players on tour and the best form player of 2024 in Danielle Collins, with the final again between world number 1 Swiatek and world number 2 Sabalenka. The men's semifinalists had an average ranking of 19, with one of the finalists, Alexander Zverev, about to defend himself in a domestic abuse hearing while continuing to play. Some of that is to do with the caprices of injury and form, but they are intrinsic parts of tennis, And they don't change the fact that the WTA Tour appears to be locking into a generational rivalry while the ATP Tour is in relative flux. If a similar dynamic emerges at Roland Garros, is the men's event still qualitatively better because of 2 more sets? Billie Jean King, the trailblazing Grand Slam champion and founding figurehead of the WTA Tour, is adamant. As long as there are different formats, there will be inequality. Hang around with her even a little bit, and 3 phrases keep coming up. Same format, equal content, equal exposure. To King, if a women's match only lasts 60% as long as a men's match, then they will receive 60% of the television exposure as the men and spend 60% of the time on the biggest courts in the biggest tournaments. That math practically guarantees that women are less well-known and attract less money. There are exceptions: Williams, Maria Sharapova, Naomi Osaka, Emma Raducanu, Coco Gauff, but the numbers are hard to overcome. World number 1 Swiatek has recently bagged the huge sponsorships her status deserves, but it's taken time. Tournament directors say having men and women play best of 5 is impossible from a scheduling perspective. Too many too long matches, too few courts, and the players don't want it. King and others have offered a solution: best of 3 for everyone the first week, best of 5 the second. There's precedent. 50 years ago at the French Open, the men played best of 3 for the first 2 rounds. Bjorn Borg and Chris Evert won their first Grand Slam titles, and you might remember that they did pretty well after that. The sun also continued to rise in the East. The knock-on effects of the current system on scheduling also virtually guarantee more conflict and inequality, sometimes in the name of equality. Tennis players of a certain age who spent time around private clubs remember times not very long ago when men got first dibs on high-demand slots. Alina Svitolina said that the men, regular players, not tour stars, still get the prime slots at the club near her home in Monte Carlo. Svitolina, top 20 in her sport, formerly a world number 3, had to practice early morning or at dusk. 3 years ago, the French Open started holding a night session with a featured singles match, which now starts at 8:15 p.m. in the main stadium, Court Philippe Chatrier. The tournament markets it as the match of the day. The US and Australian Open schedule 2 matches in their night sessions, until the late rounds. During the first 3 years, Roland Garros organizers scheduled a total of 4 women's matches at night. Amélie Mauresmo, the former women's world number 1 and tournament director, initially justified the disparity by explaining that men's tennis is more appealing. She tried to walk that back, but also explained that charging a premium for a session that might finish in an hour is problematic. A knock-on effect of those unequal formats that deprives top women of a primetime audience. Moving a doubles match onto Chatrier after Iga Swiatek blows through an opponent 6-0, 6-1 isn't seen as viable. There are players who like the hype and the energy, and maybe the conditions, but for me it's more comfortable to just have the normal day/night rhythm, Swiatek said. I think it's more healthy for me to play day sessions. That was arguably a self-inflicted wound, as were Aryna Sabalenka's recent comments about preferring men's tennis. However, this also illustrates another unspoken dynamic. Women have to be extra careful not to say anything denigrating about their sport, lest they get criticized for not supporting fellow players, even though a top men's player saying something about their sport would likely not be considered an existential threat to its repute. It's also rare that male players speak up. Andy Murray's corrections of journalists: first, stats are an exception. The 3-time Grand Slam champion has routinely reminded journalists of their forgetting about the Williams sisters, most notably in 2017 when a reporter claimed Sam Querrey was the first American to reach a major semifinal since 2009. Canadian Denis Shapovalov wrote that, "I think some people might think of gender equality as mere political correctness," in an essay on the equal pay in the Players' Tribune in 2023. Furthermore, it's well documented that top men's players have unspoken preferences, which they often communicate to tournaments, and which tournaments, unspokenly, try to accommodate or nudge around. They do this some for top women too. Rafael Nadal has said clay court tennis should never take place at night, and it goes on. The other scheduling inequality also happens at night. No one, man or woman, wants to play the second late match at the US or Australian Open with a ridiculous start time. The men argue that if women are getting equal pay, then they should play the late match half the time. Okay, but then a men's match goes 5 sets in 4 hours, and the women start at 11:30 p.m. in an empty stadium. Sometimes scheduling benefits to men happens so fast no one really notices. The Madrid Open experimented with a new doubles format this year, cramming the men's event mostly into the second half of the second week. That meant men who weren't playing the singles got an extra week off. A highly ranked man who lost early could find a doubles partner, and with him an extra few days of free food, lodging, and practice. Nice. The women's doubles? It started at the start. They didn't have that option. Organizers didn't purposefully set out to deprive them. It just happened, and they had to deal with it. This attitude extends to matters of inequality in planning and infrastructure off-court, too. Anxiety about change doesn't just extend to the number of sets played or matches scheduled. Wimbledon only relaxed its all-white dress code after concerns from players about menstruation last year, where the tournament previously required all clothing, including underwear, to be white. At the time, Magda Linette told The Athletic that she has had a couple of situations at Wimbledon where I felt very uncomfortable and welcomed the change, but it had required strident protest at the previous year's tournament to make it happen. Top players have become increasingly open about discussing the impact of menstruation on form and performance, with numerous female players talking about PMS impact on their game, albeit while coding it as girl things in press conferences. China's Zheng Qinwen saw cramps derail what would have been a famous victory against Iga Swiatek at the French Open in 2022, while Swiatek herself opened up about PMS contributing to her loss to Maria Sakkari of Greece at the same tournament in 2021. PMS really hit me that day. I'm telling this for every young girl who doesn't know what's going on. Don't worry, it's normal. Everybody has it, she said. As we wrap up, it's clear that while progress has been made, tennis still has a long way to go in achieving true equality for women. From the pay gap to the lack of visibility, these issues can't be ignored. Change is needed, and it starts with awareness and action from both fans and the tennis community. Fire, what do you think? How can we push for a more equal future in tennis? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in the importance of this conversation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all our latest content. Thanks for watching, and let's continue to advocate for fairness in the world of tennis.